Right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tracy Greer. I'm the head of marketing for Mando. We're a digital agency committed to simplifying digital experiences for everyone. So we work with regulated industries like utilities and financial services, focusing on helping your customers to do those tasks that they don't really want to do. So I don't think any of us wakes up on a Saturday morning really excited about having to pay our water bill or to make an insurance claim, and we help to make those experiences easier, smoother, giving customers time back to do the more exciting things that they want to do with their lives. So welcome to episode 3 in our What If webinar series, where we discuss and share knowledge on customer experience, digital transformation, and how to better serve vulnerable groups. And just to let everyone know, we've got my colleague Sarah on. She'll be taking all the questions and any comments so that we can ask those at the end. So just pop those in the chat and the Q&A, and she can get back to you on those before the end. So today we've got a bumper episode with 2 guests. We've got mental health campaigner Jake Mills, who's the founder and CEO of charity Chasing the Stigma, and Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock, who's the Principal Policy Manager from Citizens Advice. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you guys can just start out, just introduce yourself and your background, and just tell us a bit more about what you do. So we'll start with Jake.
First of all, I'd like to apologise. I've just realised how inappropriate it is, but it's week whatever of lockdown that I'm sat here. I've shaved my hair. I'm sat here in a Bruce Springsteen t-shirt, and I've only just realised that is.
The joys of working from home.
Yeah, whatever. I've got pyjama bottoms on here as well. I'm Jake Mills. As you say, I'm from a charity called Chasing Stigma, which is a national mental health charity. What we're trying to do is we're trying to normalise and humanise mental health as something that everybody has, and to try and educate people about how to look after their mental health, how to have conversations about mental health, and how to find help and support. So we run something called the Hub of Hope, which is a national mental health database. And we have a training program called Ambassadors of Hope Training. It's all about how we can actually do something with conversations instead of just talking. It's actually then getting people to help and support that is available.
That's great. Thanks, Jake. And the same from Elizabeth, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock. Sorry, have just had a gulp of water, but it wasn't enough to speak so good. And I'm Principal Policy Manager at Citizens Advice, and what that means is that every day I get insight coming through my inbox about the advice that's being provided by Citizens Advice, whether that's a local office, mostly through web chat and on the phone, or the National Consumer Service. My deep expertise is in energy, but more and more we're seeing the importance of looking across utility sectors and to make sure that there's good practice being shared across industries to support people, particularly people who are facing debt.
That's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. We'll get onto some discussion now. So the topic for today's interview is around mental health, around debt and the recession, and how the culmination of all 3 of these, I mean, obviously they were present before COVID, but the combination of those 3 topic areas and how that's going to affect customers' lives over the next kind of short-term period, and then looking longer ahead, and how companies can actually better serve those customers. So we know that debt in itself is already a really big trigger for mental health issues, with 46% of people in problem debt also having a mental health issue. And vice versa. So mental health issues have affected the way that customers access and manage their services, particularly essential services like water, energy, financial services and telecoms. So with customers facing personal challenges like anxiety, lack of motivation, and communications like social anxiety. So I wanted to start out by asking both of you about your experiences with debt and mental health prior to the current situation surrounding COVID. So Jake, we'll start with you. If you can just give us a bit of an outline around what people have been telling you at Chasing the Stigma and at the Hub of Hope about some of the difficulties that they've faced with debt and mental health previously?
Yeah, so we get a lot of people who are coming to us asking for help and advice, and because we've got the Hub of Hope as a directory of help and support, because as a charity we have this kind of open approach as people who have lived experience. We tend to get a lot of people who do come to talk to us and ask us for that help and advice, and a lot of the time, as you said before, the situation that we're currently in, finance and debt is a significant factor in why somebody may be feeling like they're spiraling out of control, and more so the situation that we're in now. I have to say, one of the biggest things we were seeing in regards to anxiety was more so the feeling and fear of possibly going into debt rather than people who were in debt. And that could, and it was because of things like furloughing and job security, payments, money going out. So there was a lot of things that were coming up, which were around debt, but as I said, not necessarily those people who were specifically in debt at that time, which in itself is quite a nice thing, and it's quite a positive thing that people were reaching out at that stage, which is, from our point of view, we really, really like that, because we're able to get people to the help and support before things fall into that difficulty, which is really nice. But we do know that financial problems and worry of debt is one of the biggest contributing factors to why somebody will and may be struggling with their mental health. So that's why it's really, really important that we do have that conversation about money. And when we talk about stigmas, and we talk about stigma from a mental health point of view, but stigma around money and finance is often something that's a sticking point, particularly to British people who find it a bit awkward to talk about money and finance and all those situations. So it has its own problems as well, where people almost don't want to admit that they are struggling financially. So it's really good that we have been able to see people coming forward to talk about that. But that's why this conversation is really, really important.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll go on to look at how some of those inquiries have been changing with you guys during COVID as well. So Elizabeth, I guess similar question to you. What kind of queries have you seen coming through from Citizens Advice? And then maybe we'll have a look at the money and mental health policy after, but if you can just give us a summary of some of the issues that you've been facing.
Yes, so we've had an incredible increase in the number of people reaching out to get advice about their financial management, and that kind of comes through in lots of different ways. So one of the ways being most straightforward is to look at the access to our website. So we've seen an incredible increase in the number of people seeking advice about furlough, but then also more recently about redundancy, and then the different advice pages that are available for getting help paying your utilities bills. And we've also seen short-term peaks around particular topics throughout the different stages of lockdown. So, for example, in my area of energy, we saw a very high peak of people trying to figure out how they were going to top up their energy prepayment meter once lockdown started and they weren't able to get to the shop. But what the really clear trend is an enormous amount of need for advice that means that people can get their head around a very new financial situation, which might have been the case for a few people or a smaller group of people in the past. But now what we see in this crisis is that there's an enormous amount of people who all need the same kind of support from their utilities firms and from advice providers all at the same time. So I don't think that it could be underestimated just how much that focusing of the need of the volume of advice all at the same time is going to have on all of us in all of our different sectors.
Absolutely. So you're saying that you've seen inquiries change as we've gone through. So at the start, was it very much kind of almost like a shock and people kind of panicking about not being able to pay bills, and then it's kind of moved through different phases since then?
Yeah, absolutely. But the concern about financial resilience has certainly been consistent through the period.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So I'm just going to bring up a quick slide for Elizabeth to talk us through. So this is from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, and they published a really useful summary in their latest report, which describes the challenges that people experiencing mental health problems may face when dealing with service providers. So I'm just going to bring that up now. We thought it would just be a really useful summary for everybody to see.
Well, that's coming up. I'll start talking because I know we haven't got an enormous amount of time today.
Yeah,
so firstly, I'd like to highlight some research from Britain Thinks from before the COVID crisis about mental health and interacting with essential service providers. And that called out 3 features really, which are common across many mental health challenges. There's some specific ones for specific diagnoses, but what was consistent were 3 features that Britain Thinks talked about: change aversion, intermittent communication, and fluctuating management were the 3 themes that they identified. And as I'm sure you can would all understand, no matter what industry you're in, those 3 features are really key in terms of expectations about how a customer would interact with you, and will be consistently important across lots of different types of customer journey. So this is a great kind of trying to get everything on a slide, which I have to say I never quite manage when it comes to something as complex as this, but that there are different ways in which someone's mental health on any one day might impact the way that they do account management on a day-to-day basis, and some of the specifics are around some of the more straightforward things around utilities, like submitting a meter reading or paying a bill. I think it's really important to highlight there that even in those day-to-day interactions, if someone is having a particularly challenging time, any activity can be a real challenge. I've struggled myself with chronic depression, and the support that I get from people who are supporting me is, if you just need to be able to do those basics, and they can be as basic as making sure you have 3 meals a day, and that you're looking after the people around you. So actually, even though submitting a meter read in one way of thinking is very straightforward, if you're really trying to focus on those day-to-day getting through, even that can be delayed if you're having a really tough time. The other 3 I think is more straightforward to understand, even if you haven't had a mental health challenge. Getting in touch with a provider, understanding and navigating complex information, and then in particular making a complaint or dealing with a problem. All of those things mean interacting, and unfortunately can often mean interacting on the pace of change that the individual firm thinks is the right way of doing things, so a particular process. Some of the real challenges here can be if there's a particular channel or a particular team which you as a firm are relying on to be able to do what can be a very complex interaction with someone who's struggling with their mental health. So if, for example, you're set up with a great team of highly trained people only on the phone, that can be great for people who firstly can identify that team is there, that know the kind of support that they need to ask for, and they're comfortable on the phone. Unfortunately, our advice, our research at Citizen Advice suggests that many people who are struggling with their mental health are not comfortable in talking about their mental health on the phone. They'd much rather use an app or web chat, and then a lot of the standard processes around interacting with a firm might include some posts, and we've seen in our research that 60% of people felt anxious about opening posts if they had a pre-existing mental health challenge. So what's really important there is to have a range of different channels that people can interact with at their own pace, so that they can firstly identify that they need some support to you in an interaction, and then also that they have the time, particularly around debt, and especially now, to come to terms with what might be a very new financial situation.
That's great, thanks Elizabeth. And I think, that slide is definitely a great summary, isn't it? So let me just go back to great. So we'll go on now to talk about kind of the future, and where we think we'll end up. So obviously with COVID-19, you know, the levels of debt, the levels of recession are going to be huge. We've been told that lots of times. You know, we've got some stats just in the last few days. You know, I think it was 9,000 jobs have been lost in the last 24 hours. You know, people like retail giants like Arcadia, Airbus, Royal Mail, EasyJet, Into, you know, the list goes on and on and on. You know, 2/3 of adults in the UK report feeling somewhat or very worried about the effect COVID-19 is having on their life. That you know, that's regardless of all of the financial stuff that's going on as well. So how do you guys see this kind of combination of factors really coming to a head, and this almost a perfect storm of events where we've got, you know, people with lots of existing mental health conditions anyway, you know, affecting 1 in 4 people already, you know, a big recession that's been predicted, and the subsequent debt, and kind of how those factors are all going to combine. So if you can maybe just outline for kind of what you see happening over the next few months, and then maybe a bit of a longer term look at, say, up to the next 5 years, what you guys would predict would be happening with those factors affecting customers. So Jake, if you want to just kind of outline that for us, and maybe just touch on a few things that people have been kind of getting in touch with you about, and kind of the change in inquiries that you guys have had coming into you.
Yeah, I know this kind of session is quite specifically about money and debt, but I think it's really important to be pointing out that there's going to be problems when it comes to people's mental health far and beyond even the money and debt situation as well.
Absolutely,
This whole situation that we are in, not only are we seeing people who have pre-existing mental health problems who are having to try and deal with those now when maybe services are not working the way that they would usually be, but we're also seeing people who have never ever struggled with their mental health and suddenly are for the first time. And I would say that not only are those people struggling and having to deal with it, but they're now looking for that help and support for the first time. And I know just through the Hub of Hope, we had a huge increase in new users when lockdown was first announced, because people must have just thought, we don't know what to do, what this is going to do to me, plus my help and support that I would usually rely on, my routines are so important to people, and sometimes that means just getting up, going to work, traveling in. When that changes, a lot will change to somebody and somebody's life. We've seen, I mean, I just had a quick look before we came on the call again of new users on the Hub of Hope, so looking for help and support with their mental health. Just the day, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, I think it was the 16th of April. Usually every month we average around 4,000 new users a month. On the 16th of April, when it announced that lockdown was being extended for 3 weeks, we had 2,500 people just in that day after that announcement. So it's a big problem for people, and that's, as I said, that's not just about finance and problems and financial problems. For me, what I think the short and long term is that we're going to see, we were talking before the start about the new normal and what that is and what that means for people. We're going to see a lot of people coming out of lockdown and coming out of the bubble that we are currently in, which for a lot of people is a bit of a safety bubble. If I'm totally honest with you, I've got 2 kids here, and me and my wife are the end of our tether most days, thinking, can't wait for the schools to be open again and we can get back to normal. But if somebody said to me tomorrow, do you want to send the kids back to school and you go back to normal and you go on the train, I don't think I would. So we've got a transition area here where it's going to be really, really difficult for a lot of people, I'd say most people. And it's just something that I think is worth pointing out, because when we're particularly talking about staff or customers, and yes, we are focusing on that financial problems at the moment, but I would say that this is something that does and will affect everybody in some way, shape or form as we start returning to work and life as we're going to have to get used to it. It's going to take a long time. So there's a short term, but there's definitely a long term of making sure that we are making help and support as easy as possible to find, keeping those conversations going, not just whereas in the past a lot of people have done a lot of gestures and, you know, having a day saying let's talk about mental health. It's got to be part of policies as we are going back to work, both for staff and for customers, and looking at actual practical things that we can be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where you're saying about that kind of that transition bubble, that kind of bubble of safety, I think everybody's going to feel like that, and it's definitely going to affect, you know, those who've got mental health issues or those who may have, definitely, as we come out of that over the next few months. Elizabeth, similar question to you. Where do you see things in the next few months, and then kind of looking forward the next few years?
I think the key challenge for the next few months is going to be that people are going to need to take things at their own pace, but different industries are going to change at different their responses. So, for example, we saw the energy regulator saying that debt collection can restart, and different sectors will approach that in a different way, and different firms will approach that in a different way. So you could be in a situation where you've got a very aggressive debt recovery process from one provider, and then another provider saying, no, you know, we understand that this is a very challenging situation for all, and we're giving you support in this way. So I think navigating that over the next 3 months is going to be a real challenge. I've already seen casework coming in where people who have been able to pay their energy bill have got to the end of a credit card payment holiday and are now struggling with being able to pay their energy bill. I think in the next 3 months, knowing that the amount of change that are going on for people, even as we see the lockdown easing, that period of change will be as intense as that first few weeks in lockdown, and at the same time you can't expect that everyone will be as comfortable as others in terms of people visiting their home, particularly for something like meeting work, but also you don't know people's pace of starting to reach out to their social circle if they have one for the day-to-day support which many people rely on. So for example, we know that people who are socially isolated or lonely are much more likely to have mental health challenges and health challenges in general. Well, as a provider, if you know that there's going to be an increased number of people who are isolated for health reasons or because they want a lower risk in terms of the virus, then they might not have that day-to-day support, that neighbour keeping an eye on them, and that person who might be able to support them with a short-term bit of money to top up their prepayment meter. Those kind of network effects, as we'd say in academia, just will not be there for as many people as much of the time. So over the next 3 months, really being very aware that even though many areas of life might get back to something like normal, or processes might be restarting, that certainly won't be people's individual experiences, and the diversity of experiences will be really important to understand. As that plays out over the longer term, I think it's really important to just reflect on the speed at which all of our industries managed to pivot to be able to provide additional support, particularly around keeping people on supply, in telecoms, keeping people connected, in energy, making sure that their lights don't go off, and kind of reflecting on that support that people needed in the moment for this extreme emergency. What can we learn from that about consumers in vulnerable circumstances and about people that we can then take into the challenges which are coming? What about all the people who weren't comfortable, for example, being online or weren't able to interact with a provider online, and the fact that they were really facing very significant challenges, I think is an important thing to take forward as we rely more and more in the policy space on the idea that people are very comfortable in using tech solutions. So I think for both the short and the long term, really understanding the diversity of experiences and making sure that you're getting the feedback from your customers. It could be in some kind of formal research, and certainly we know lots of providers do that, but I'd just like to flag that your people who are interacting with your customers are an amazingly rich source of understanding experiences, particularly when it comes to the more challenging conversations around debt, but also around mental health.
Absolutely, yeah. And you touched on there about and you mentioned it before, Elizabeth, about having a number of channels available for people. How important do you think that is? You know, we know that different people find different things hard and challenging when experiencing a mental health problem. How important do you think that is to have lots of ways to contact available?
Yeah, so at Citizens Advice yesterday, we released a report in partnership with the Institute of Customer Services, and what that shows incredibly clearly is that you need to be able to have access via the web and a phone line and the option to interact in writing with providers, because different people might absolutely have preferences, but it's not for their whole interaction. So they might be very happy to do some account management online, but as soon as it's a complex, any kind of complexity, they want to use the phone, then we have the complete flip side, where people who are actually much more willing to put in an email or in a web chat something that reveals that they're struggling,
that they don't have to say out loud,
to vocalize that on the phone. Absolutely. So that ability to have, not only to have those channels available, but to make sure that any person in your firm who's interacting with a customer can see all of those things. So if you have revealed something in an email, that the next person you talk to on the phone can see that, so that they're not struggling, or the customer isn't feeling like, well, actually I had to tell you something really uncomfortable there, and where's it gone? I don't know. So having the channels available, but also making sure they're interacting really clearly.
So having this seamless kind of joined up experience between all the different channels. So like you say, if somebody's had to say something and admit something to a customer advisor, they only have to say it once, and then it's just a seamless journey where they're able to switch between channels. Absolutely, yeah. That's great. Right, we've got a couple of questions, but before we do that, I just want each of you just very quickly, in the space of a minute each, just to give us 3 top tips or 3 recommendations for companies to be able to better serve people that are experiencing these problems. So Jake, if you want to give us your 3 top tips.
Yeah, well, one big thing that I would say, and it's worth pointing out given everything that Elizabeth just talked about as well, is although we're very much talking about customers here, don't overlook your staff, and make sure that your staff are trained and prepared and understand that and look after that, so that they know how to deal with these type of things. I think it's very easy to completely overlook the type of things that your staff might hear. So knowing that if you can be looking at how you can train those or support them to be able to handle those types of queries, and also for themselves outside of the workplace as well. And again, like what Elizabeth said, is don't make assumptions. You know, let's give people options. Give people options of ways to be able to contact you and be able to share those, but then also give people options of help and support that's available. I'll leave it there, because I was going to go on to one of the questions that have come up, so I'll leave that.
Okay, we'll get you to answer that one in a second then. Same for you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so my top 3: training, time and tone. So firstly, training, even if it's not training for in any kind of big set piece, if you can make sure that your people are aware of mental health challenges, and that can be from a personal perspective, that could be about supporting each other and each other's mental health, that will build that resilience in terms of not only working together, but also then in supporting customers. Tone of communications, we've seen some very difficult messages going out, particularly around people being asked to, if they're not a priority case, to wait, and some of the tone of that has really made people really worried. So to make sure that the tone of communications is really supportive. And then time, please just making sure the time is there for people to get used to their new financial situation, and then to be able to meaningfully communicate with you about the way that they can then repay this debt. So training, time and tone.
That's perfect, thank you. Right, so we're almost at time. We could probably talk about this for hours and hours. Sarah, have we got a couple of questions that we haven't answered already in the conversation?
Yeah, I think the panelists have actually answered the two questions that we did get from Chris and Carolyn. But Chris, Carolyn, if you do want any further information, just let me know and we can obviously ask the panelists. But I do have a couple of questions. One is for you, Jake. What were the telltale signs of those people who were worried about getting into debt? How do you identify these signs early?
Biggest thing that you can be doing if you're worried about anybody is just have a conversation and talk to them and ask them at that earliest possible stage that you can do. Just to point on what Chris said as well, is looking at mental health not as a problem. You know, I think generally we as a society, we think mental health means something negative. It doesn't. Mental health doesn't mean mental illness. So mental health is a good, a positive thing that we've all got. Every single person's got mental health. So it's about that narrative around mental health, not as an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's not something someone's just going to throw at you. It's having that that understanding, like what Elizabeth said about what that is. The signs and symptoms. There's plenty of signs and symptoms, but I'm trying to rush all this now, but it's really, really important to be, if you are aware of anything, is asking that question as early as you possibly can. In regards to any of the questions that might have come up as well, I know we're short on time. I'm happy to answer any of those if anyone wants to contact me afterwards. I know Chris's question is quite complex, so I'm happy to answer that one. But yeah, in regards to what are those signs and symptoms, there's a whole range between somebody being irritable, disconnect, no motivation, lack of sleep, a lot of different things. But the most important thing is if you start noticing in yourself or others, have that conversation and have options of help and support to hand so that you can then offer them.
Yeah, and obviously the Hub of Hope is a great place to be able to point people to, isn't it? And I know from a digital perspective, you know, there are ways that things that companies can implement to be able to better see if some of their customers that are coming to them online are actually vulnerable or not. You know, looking at the different pages that they've viewed, how long they've spent on each page, and there are ways where you can gather that together in analytics and actually start to look at trends and pinpointing particular customers and things and offering them the support that they need. That's great. Thank you to both of you. Like I said, we could go on for another couple of hours with this discussion. There's so many different aspects that we could explore, and it'd be great to maybe get you guys both back on again in subsequent episodes and maybe have more of an in-depth discussion about where we are at in a few months' time. So thank you to everybody who was listening, and thanks to both Elizabeth and Jake, and we will share the recording with you shortly.